You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Sarah Gulseth. Thanks to Concordia University, Wisconsin for your support of The Coffee Hour. You can find out more about Concordia University, Wisconsin at cuw.edu. Today we get to have a conversation about having conversations, and this is going to be really fun. I love talking about conversations and relationships and listening, so this is a really fun conversation for me to have with our guest today, the Reverend Brian Davies, pastor of Lord of Glory Lutheran Church in Grayslake, Illinois, and author of Captivating Conversations, available from Concordia Publishing House. Pastor Davies, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It means a lot.
So we're going to talk about conversation and listening skills today. Two things I really love to talk about, but let's ask the why question first. Why does it even matter for us to have good conversational and listening skills?
Oh man, that's a great first question, and we better have a good conversation because that's what the book is about, right? But I think, as I cut to the chase here, our conversations are what strengthen relationships, and if we want to have good relationships with our kids, with our grandkids, with our spouses, with our coworkers, it's really going to be birthed out of really good conversations.
Yes, I fully agree. So what do you, in your place as a pastor, you also serve as a chaplain, as an author, in all of your vocations, what do you see as the current state of having conversations and discourse in our culture right now?
That's what made me and led me to really explore this topic and write this book. Because I'm guessing like you, Sarah, and like a lot of our listeners, just surveying the landscape, you see people talking over each other, at each other, argumentative. You don't get the sense that people are actually taking the time to listen to one another. People spend time while they're listening thinking about what they're going to say over the other person to win the argument. And it's like I see all of that and I start to think, there has got to be a better way. And the reality is there is, and Jesus models it.
How do you see social media affecting this, influencing this, all of those things?
I gotta think it's a huge factor in escalation of discourse and conversation in our culture. First of all, it models that you can be incredibly inhumane to people, right? There's things that you would say typing in a keyboard that you would never say face-to-face with somebody. That's number one. Second, it's quick, right? It's like, how many letters can I get in? Or how, rather than, think about the great conversations maybe you've had or our listeners have had that have been 3 to 4 hours around a fire pit. You know what I mean? That's when magic happens, not in the 3-sentence attack blurb, So I think it teaches us to shorten it, and I think also finally it teaches us to be as sharp as possible, as pointed as possible, to get the most clicks or to get the most reactions, to get the most amount of likes or whatever, which rarely does good in interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, a lot of more surface level or short quips, the sound bite kind of culture, instead of being able to dig deep. And it's almost become uncomfortable. It feels like, at least from my perspective, it can be almost uncomfortable to actually be willing to dig a little bit deeper with people because we're just not used to that in a lot of our relationships and circles because of what social media has done to our ability to communicate.
No doubt. And it's becoming kind of a lost art. I mourn it. It's a point of emphasis for my wife and I with our kids. That's why church to me there's a huge value in what happens, of course, in the sanctuary, but also in the lobby, because intergenerational conversations happen. Our high school students who are planning to go to the youth gathering in the summer did a after church hot soup and bingo hour with our seniors. It was magical. Probably had about 30 or 40 seniors and about 20 or 30 students, all sitting at different tables, playing together, laughing together. It went on for 2 hours. I don't think anyone wishes it was shorter. It was wonderful.
That sounds fantastic. Those opportunities for very organic conversation don't happen in a lot of spaces in our culture anymore. So having those skills, especially as teenagers, is really, really incredible for those teenagers to learn how to do.
No doubt.
Now you mentioned church. Let's talk about Jesus. Where do we learn from Jesus? How does Jesus model having good conversations? What kind of skills does he use?
Yeah, so I'll just tell you, Sarah, my journey in this was kind of observing the discourse and culture, seeing it play out on, news talk shows and in social media. Then it's like, come on, we can do better. And then, of course, as a Christian, as a pastor, my baseline is to go to what does the Bible actually say about this? So I started looking at the ministry of Jesus Christ. And maybe you've heard this before, Sarah. Maybe your listeners have as well. But over the course of Jesus' earthly ministry in the Gospels, he asks over 300 questions. And that just off the bat struck me because it was like, man, if there was ever anyone who should come down to earth and just tell people what to do and tell people what to think, it was Jesus. But Jesus, who, part of the triune God, creates humanity, knows that the best way to have a breakthrough with human beings is the art of asking good questions.
What is it about a question that opens up a good conversation?
Well, I think number one, I would contrast it versus a statement. And if you give someone a statement or a piece of unsolicited advice, it often backs them into a corner and they automatically are defensive about it. If you ask someone a question, you're actually showing that you care about them. You're actually showing genuine curiosity for them. You invite them to process and think. And that's really what we see Jesus do, is he asks questions that invite his disciples or the people that interact with him to actually think and process for themselves about what they believe to be true.
What is it about questions? I feel so awkward, like asking questions about questions right now. This is really fun. What is it about questions that lead to good listening skills? How are those two things connected?
Well, thank you, Sarah. That's such a good question. And it's so goofy for me to say that. But to me, it's like when I read this, I did a lot of like secular research reading about this topic because I was just really
Yeah.
curious. This is not just like a Christian topic. This is making hay in the secular and business worlds, right? About listening and stuff like that. And I had one author do like a brain analysis of what happens when somebody asks you a lot of genuine questions. And if you feel like you're being genuinely cared about by another person, some of the same hormones fire in your brain and body as when you're eating like a delicious steak dinner. Like you just feel like this is so good. I'm feeling loved, I'm feeling known, I'm feeling cared for. So like the art of listening well is really the art of asking really good questions. They're kind of two sides of the same coin because they communicate so much.
How have you seen this in the variety of your own vocations, either doing this really well or not really well yourself? How have you seen this play out?
Oh, I've done both. I've done both. I've done it so well and I've done it so poorly. And oftentimes when something has not gone well, it's because I didn't take the time to listen and ask really good questions. And I actually made preconceived notions or prejudging a situation or a person rather than really getting to the underneath the bottom of what was leading the person to think that way or act that way. I think about it in my teaching ministry. I get to be with 6th or 8th graders every Wednesday night teaching confirmation. The best Wednesday nights are when I sit at the whiteboard and ask a whole bunch of questions and let them wrestle with it, and then together with me and the Bible get to the truth. The worst Wednesday nights are when it's a lot of direct instruction, which is like yap, 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 me to them. And the irony is my wife's a public school teacher. She goes to professional development and they talk about it. They talk about like, the 8 different things you can do in a classroom and they rank them. And number 8 in terms of most successful is what's called direct instruction, which is teacher to student telling stuff. That is the least successful method of getting through to the students, which I'm like, Jesus modeled it. We ought to pay attention.
I can see how that would be true in a variety of different places and spaces. What is true listening? What does it look like to be a listener?
Well, and here's where I believe that what the way I handle this in the book is helpful. I mean, I wrote the book. I don't think it's okay, right? It's okay for me to say that, I hope. But you can read a lot. There's a lot of YouTube videos about listening skills. Maybe we've all been to like a listening skills workshop, where you talk about body language and physical posture. And I will be the first to say that stuff matters, right? If you're, anxious with your hands, if you're looking at your phone, if you're cross-armed, all that matters. But really what I hammer in the book is inviting people to think not so much about listening skills as in what you do, but your attitude and kind of almost the mental posture you take going into that moment. And I invite people to take a posture that's really, you're actually genuinely open, you're curious, you're inquisitive, and things like that. I think that really helps people in their mindset enter that listening moment differently.
And we'll get to the open, curious, and inquisitive after the break. But how do we overestimate our ability to do listening well? Do we overestimate our ability to listen well?
I mentioned that in the book too. It's like if you ask a group of 30 people, how many of you think you're really good listeners? I think a lot of people would raise their hand. Like, yeah, I'm a good listener. But if you say how many people around you, like in your life, are good listeners, they'd be like, oh, very few people. I'm like, well, there's a disconnect there, obviously, because you're all raising your hand and you're all living life with one another, right? So I do think we probably overestimate it a little bit because we think we're showing like we're listening, but we're not doing the actual habits and practices that show the other person that we're actually listening.
We have more to talk about with Conversations and Listening with the Reverend Brian Davies, pastor of Lord of Glory Lutheran Church in Grayslake, Illinois, and author of Captivating Conversations, available from CPH. We'll be right back. You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Sarah Golseth.
At Concordia University, Wisconsin, we believe you were created for a reason. To use your God-given gifts to help others. To live a life of self-sacrifice in a me-first world. To live a life that's uncommon. Whether you're taking one of 50-plus online programs or learning with us in person on the shores of Lake Michigan, you'll be equipped to make an uncommon impact. Learn more at cuw.edu. Concordia University, Wisconsin. Live uncommon.
Welcome back to the Coffee Hour. I'm Sarah Golseth. We are talking with the Reverend Brian Davies, pastor of Lord of Glory Lutheran Church in Grayslake, Illinois, and author of Captivating Conversations, available from CPH, about conversations and listening well. And this is such a fun topic. I love talking about all of these relational things, how to be a better person in a relationship. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. And before we went to break, I promised we would get to open, curious, and inquisitive. So let's dive into this for a little bit. Since this is one of the skills that you have in the book, I think it's very applicable to basically any conversation that you are having with anybody. So let's talk about open, curious, and inquisitive. What does this mean?
Great question. And Sarah, thanks for observing. It's probably one of my favorite parts of the book. Maybe your listeners have heard of the show CSI Miami, CSI Las Vegas, whatever. I kind of wanted to make something memorable like that. I did this for my congregation, kind of a way to actually remind yourself how to practice the skills that we talk about in the book. And so rather than CSI, I talk about OCI, which is living open, living curious, and living inquisitive. So this is the posture you take, kind of the mental move you make when you enter conversations. And really quickly, the O stands for open, meaning I am open to where this conversation might lead. I'm open to learning. I'm not going to make assumptions. I'm not going to prejudge the other person. Even though maybe I have a preconceived mindset of what this conversation is going to be like, I'm not going to go into it closed-minded. The curious means I actually genuinely want to learn this person's story. I genuinely want to get to know them better. I genuinely want to discover their why. Like, why are they actually thinking that way? Like, what's underneath it all that's leading them to think or act that way? And then the inquisitive thing means like kind of the approach you take to practice being open and curious, and that's inquisitive, that you're asking questions, that when the impulse you have is to say something or to make an observation, that you're actually going to pull back from that and ask a question, because that's going to advance the conversation much further.
These skills, I think, come naturally to some people and not so naturally to other people. Everyone just has different skill sets, different talents, different gifts. If someone is listening to this and is like, I don't know how to approach a conversation and be open about it because that person is wrong and I need to tell them that they're wrong, is there a way to practice this kind of openness and the curiosity if it's something that doesn't come naturally to people?
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Let me say two things to that, Sarah. So if you're entering a conversation like with the mindset, hey, they're wrong and I need to tell them they're wrong, I get that, right? I do get that. For instance, I'm a pastor, right? Like, I am in counseling situations where someone is openly making a decision that is against the will of God. So of course, as a pastor, I'm not going to sit there and be like, I'm just going to ask questions. No, no, I'm here to speak truth to them. However, the reality is, I am in the business of life change in the hearts and minds of other people, right? Like, I want them to make a change. I want them to turn away from sin and to the gospel, right? However, what will do that? Questions. Questions do that. Jesus models that for us. So if you're going into a conversation thinking, okay, what am I going to tell them that could make them change their mind? That the buzzer should go off in your mind and say, nope, not going to do that, because that's not going to work. That doesn't work. What does work is really great questions that foster self-reflection and examination. So rather than saying, hey, what am I going to say in this moment, go into it saying, hey, what questions might I ask in this moment to help elicit a breakthrough? The second thing I'll say to this, Sarah, is I totally get the idea that people feel like, hey, I'm not good at this, right? It doesn't come naturally to me. Totally get that. And I think part of it is it can feel like almost contrived, or it can feel fake to make some of the statements that I make in the book, but I submit they work so well. Simple statements like, let me see if I understand this correctly, right? Hey, could you tell me more about that? That might feel weird, like, to practice it, you know what I mean? Or it even feels weird coming out of your mouth. And the first couple times, it feels like it does, because it feels insincere because you read it in a book. But watch it work, because people love to talk about themselves and their personal stories. And by asking those questions, you get them to do it.
Yeah, and it might not be until you're on the receiving end of one of those questions when it clicks for you, like, oh, this person actually wants to know more about my story. And that kind of can get you past the barrier of feeling very closed off and shut down in a conversation. It does require, I see the words vulnerability and empathy also in here, which can make people feel a little squeamish. Talk about those two things too, that can be difficult to be vulnerable and to have empathy for people in conversations.
Yeah, why do you think those are difficult? Not to turn the tables on you, Sarah,
Hey,
but I
I have
am
another
curious.
question too.
I am curious about it.
Oh, those things can, it can be scary to be vulnerable in a conversation, to have empathy for somebody, because then you have to open up yourself. You have to open up your own maybe preconceived notions and admit that maybe you might be wrong. You have something to learn. You maybe don't know everything about this person, and maybe you should, and you're realizing that you don't. It can be scary to be in that position.
Exactly right. And I think, like, it almost feels like out of control, right? It feels like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm in control if I'm, like, just speaking statements, right? And it may go down a path you may not expect. I would submit it's going to go down a much better path, a relationship strengthening path, which I think is going to be better in the long run.
All right, let's talk about thoughtful listening. I know these things, the open, curious, and inquisitive, are part of that. How else would you describe thoughtful listening?
It's been helpful to me. It's been helpful to the staff team I serve at church. We have ministry conversations. We do this in our home as well. And so there's an acronym that has been shared with me that I have used myself and share with others, which is the READ strategy, READ. And it's just kind of like 4 steps, 4 moves you make in a conversation, and you kind of don't move on to the next one until you've successfully completed each step. The first one is reflect. So if you're entering a conversation where someone's struggling with a trouble in their marriage or frustration at work or their husband got laid off or whatever. So you're going to reflect means you're going to state back to them what you've heard them say. And here's the key part. Until the other person says, yes, that's it, exactly. Brian, you understand it. Thank you, right? Then you nail down the E, which is emotion. So that's kind of getting past the facts and into the feelings, because getting to the feelings is really what's going to create a breakthrough. So you're going to land the emotion. That must be really frustrating for you. Or that must be really unsettling for you, because now you don't know what's next going to look like with your husband. Affirm is the A, so R-E-A-D. Reflect, emotion, and then affirm. Affirm is, hey, I want to affirm you for blank. Hey, what do you see in the other person that's admirable, that's something that's honorable, that's God-pleasing, that's the fruit of the Spirit? I think that also is a bridge-building statement. And then here's the key part. The D stands for disclose. That's where you ask permission to give them feedback. So that would be something like, hey, Sarah, I've loved visiting with you, and I'm so thankful that you were open with me about what's going on at home for you. If I had some feedback for you about what I've observed from our conversation, would you be open to hearing that? That sounds fake or funny to say, but there's been times where people have been like, yeah, no, I'm not in the mood for it. Great. Okay, great. Well, then we had a good conversation. I was here for you in your moment of need, but you're not ready for feedback, and that's really good. Other times, more often than not, 9 times out of 10, it's like, yes, please, what do you have for me? And the reason they take that posture of curiosity about what you want to say is because you've spent the R, E, and A building that trust and that bridge with them to actually hear what you have to say. And the irony is, last thing here, Sarah, is often we start with a disclose, don't we? Right? Yeah. That's so instinctive for us. Person's in crisis. Okay, first thing for me to do is tell them what to do, right? But that's actually the last step.
Yeah, it's very easy for us, and I think that's a very natural thing when I see somebody who is hurting or in pain or has something going on that obviously they're struggling with. It's hard to not fix it first. That is just such a natural response to be like, I know a solution that will work for you, and here's what it is. But I love what you're saying about being curious first and asking them what's going on, because a lot of people can solve their problems, right? If we give them the space to that they know that they're loved and cared for. A lot of times they might not even need your feedback. They're like, hey, I have a solution now. Thanks for listening to me. That verbal processing out loud can be so helpful. So helpful for people. So I like this read approach. How have you seen this work in your own ministry? Have you been able to put this into practice?
Absolutely. And back to your point, sometimes we don't even get to disclose because the act of the R and the E and the A has helped them see a solution that they didn't see. Or you ask some questions, a simple question like, hey, what have you considered in light of what's happening, right? And then they kind of come to their own conclusion. And your point about kind of oftentimes it's so arrogant to think that we would know what someone else ought to do. The reality is the answers often lie with the people who are closest to the situation. My wife's in elected politics, and one thing she's observed is the best answers usually lie in the people who are closest to the problem, right? So if someone's having a problem in a neighborhood, they know what's best, they know what's actually happening, right? Not someone from the outside coming in and telling them what to do. So yes, I've seen this work successfully. I've also seen it work at home. I've seen it work with my 3 teenage kids. This is how we do life at home together, is kind of practicing these skills. And I think it really leads to strong relationships. I really do.
Now, you have more to say in your book, Captivating Conversations, How Christians Can Reclaim the Lost Art of Listening. Obviously, we can't cover the entire book in 25 minutes. How would you like readers to use this book as a tool?
Shocking. But I think the best way to read the book is in community with others. So I would encourage you to grab a friend, or if you're in a book club, or if you're in a small group Bible study. This really lends itself to a Bible study. A small group could go through it together. I wrote the book to be incredibly accessible. It almost has like cartoon style graphics in it, really big font. I liked that. Great job, Team CPH. But there's like kind of conversation bubbles throughout the book. I think the layout is tremendous. I meant it to be very accessible, very practical, and I think it is. So grab a friend, grab a group, talk about it, and you can always email me. I'll Zoom in with your book club or talk about it with your Bible study, and we can have a conversation together.
Fantastic. The Reverend Brian Davies, pastor of Lord of Glory Lutheran Church in Grayslake, Illinois, and author of Captivating Conversations, available from CPH. We will put the link in the show notes of where to find that book. Thank you so much, Pastor Davies, for joining me today.
Fastest 24 minutes of my life, Sarah. That was so much fun.
You've been listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Sarah Gulseth.
The Coffee Hour with Andy and Sarah is a production of KFUO. To support The Coffee Hour and KFUO Radio, visit KFUO.org. You can also text KFUO to 41444 or send an email to gifts@kfuo.org. And you can call us at 800-844-0524. KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere.